Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
It's a matter of leaning into the intelligences that you are strong with and forgetting the other ones, adding value there where you need the value, but forgetting them. I call it my instinctive advantages, the things that I'm naturally inclined to do well that make me the best person that I am, with regards to, again, what I do.
Today I'm joined by Tye Glover, founder of Think Different Nation. Tye and I sit down to talk about a familiar story in which Tye was told at school that he'd maybe better think about using his hands because his brain really wasn't up to the task. It was complete bullshit, and he's gone on to find neurocreative programming, something that is helping people around the world to join the dots, to understand their behaviours and their creativity. It's a big one. It's a deep one. This is the Creative Condition podcast. How are you doing, guys? Welcome to the show. My name is Ben Talon. This is the Creative Condition. I hope you're well. I hope you're feeling energized. I hope you're tapping into some gorgeous flow states. Morning, afternoon, good evening. How you doing? Welcome back to regular listeners if you're new to the show. Hello, and thank you for checking in. I hope you're going to stick with us. This is a show where we explore human creativity. I walk the line between creative industry actionable advice and just fulfilling lives and understanding the way you operate and talking to a broad range of people from around the world about all kinds of different topics from both the arts and beyond the arts, in psychology and areas of sensitivity and nutrition and all sorts. It's all about making us our best selves so we can create in an optimal state, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. Do drop us a little subscribe and a rate and review if you get the chance. It helps the show massively, and you can always say hello on social media. I am out there. Or if you're feeling more private, you can come and say hello at bentalon.com. Welcome back. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can have a look at their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. These guys have been supporting the show since day one. So I hope you're good. How did you find Eve Warren? Eve was wonderful last week. We got into the trend of overloading job descriptions and demands, especially in relation to junior and entry-level positions, and is it damaging creativity? I don't think there's any doubt that it certainly puts too much strain on the idea that, new talent should be coming in and given a longer leash and the chance to sit under somebody else's learning tree and to bring new ideas and fresh approaches and curiosity. But if they're being asked to do 7 people's work, however noble the reasons might be, we know people are cash strapped, then I think it really is damaging to creativity. But that was a mazy, meandering conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for the kind feedback for those who took the time to do so. It always means a lot as I sit here in this little garden studio recording and talking to the wall. I'm kidding. I know I'm talking to you guys. I know people listen. I do get the stats. We've got Tye Glover coming up today. Tye got in touch. He'd come across the show and he thought there was a great overlap with the work that I was doing with the Creative Condition and his own thinkdifferentnation.com. Here's a little bit from the website. This is a conversation that goes every which way. I loved this. Tye was a bundle of energy, and to think that this guy was told at school that he really wasn't up to it in his brain in terms of doing anything academic or clever, it's fucking heartbreaking. How many people have had their confidence smashed and never repaired with such stupid advice through education systems that are archaic? to not get back up. On a side note, in the Creative Condition book, which is available to pre-order now at bentalentwriter.com/shop or on Amazon Kindle, there is a big chunk of this book that is about the education system and how it's not fit for purpose, but how we might get there and what we need to do. Speaking to teachers and people like John Newbegin, chair of Creative England, and also personal experiences that do overlap with the experiences that Tye had. So this is from the website. Anyone can become more creative and transform their life and destiny. Are you one of the 50% of all people who consider themselves as not being creative? The truth is that it is impossible not to be creative. You just don't know the process of creativity and the questions that truly creative people ask of themselves. Neurocreative Programming, NCP, will teach you both the questions to ask and the ways to make your observations even more impactful. NCP is a psychological methodology that examines how we perceive all information through our 5 senses of seeing, hearing, smell, tasting, and touching, and arrive at an understanding of our experiences. We use this data, information, as the raw materials from which all of our ideas will emerge. Tye is a really intriguing character. So when I sort of read this breakdown on the website, I thought, yeah, all right, I'll have a bit of that. Let's have you. So we sat down, and I wasn't expecting the sheer range in his chat, but Tye was brilliant. I hope you're going to take a lot from this today. I'd be very surprised if you don't. And again, it's about the idea of understanding and accepting who we are and working with our beliefs and reframing some of them because they're holding us back and all that good stuff. So, you know, it's that there seems to be a real sea change in awareness at the moment, and I think this is one of the major upsides of the internet and social media, is that we have so many resources now at our fingertips to do with psychology and, you know, evolutionary brain functions and nutrition and stuff. And it, you know, if you can manage the big dark side of the internet and the distraction and the bullshit and the scrolling and not waste your life away, there's so many good things. And I think that's what's causing this kind of groundswell of knowledge about our brains and about happiness and about creativity, and Tye is just the latest person to come to this show and bring a bit of that fire. So enjoy this one. Do go and check out the Ukrainian Institute, please. I keep shouting about them. There's so much great talent there, and these people are still managing to, you know, fight their way through a war and keep creating, and it's inspiring, and the least we can do is share some of it, but also maybe there are opportunities to commission the talent, you know. So check them out, ui.org.ua. Big thank you again to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can check out their range of portfolios now, illustrationx.com. Enjoy this one with Tye Glover.
My wife and I have an expression when we think about, like, Mount Everest rose from the bottom of the ocean 40,000 or 20,000 feet below sea level to 29,000 feet above sea level at a rate of 1/2 of an inch per year over 50 million years.
Yeah.
So we know that if we continue to move and to do at least one thing forward to where we want to be, we'll get there. You know, we call it more near than before. So we're getting closer and closer each day.
I like to start with childhood, but first of all, I just love to just touch upon your current role today, and Think Different Nation, and because it's fascinating to me.
Thank you.
The moment you emailed, it was the second I saw the crossroads between neuroscience and creativity, you had me.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you. It's something that has been a passion of mine. You know, I'm a creator, but a different kind of a creator. And I never really recognized the alignment until you had mentioned the creative industries, and then I started researching that term, and I saw a product developer. You know, I saw those other types of creative forms that you don't normally see lumped into the creative industries or that structure. And I started to more so see. I've always seen the alignment of what I do. You know, I'm very good at identifying opportunities. You know, I've always been keen towards solving a problem. Either it's a problem that is a painful one that we want to minimize, or it's a opportunity to really excel in a particular area. I've always been good at that. And I started to recognize the processes that are playing out whenever we create. And so that's what kind of helped me to really get an understanding of there is a process associated with creativity that we all go through. Regardless of the medium and the way through which we express that, we have to take in information in order to use that information to be able to create something new. Steve Jobs referred to it as being dots.
Hmm.
And so I started really studying the dots and how do we get those dots.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been writing a lot about this recently, and I became increasingly fascinated with the unconscious and the way we would everything we consume through our senses,
Yeah.
needed it. We don't have ultimately it's like we don't have control over when and where that manifests, but we can certainly become attuned to that process and the
Right.
reasons why and be more sympathetic and ready for them. Is that something that you'd agree with?
Yeah, most definitely. And I would say we have more control over that process than we actually are aware of. I mean, there's a prolific writer back in I guess probably in the 70s, 80s was when he really hit his stride, and his name was Ingo Swann. And this guy was a person who was directly involved in understanding his sensory perception and his ability. And I mean, this man was used for 20 years, literally by the CIA to understand processes of thought and what is possible within the mind itself of consciousness. Even doing such things as remote viewing, where you're able to move out of your consciousness and see literally other locations in full detail. And you can literally Google his name and you will find reams of reports conducted by the CIA to really document what this man did. So, it's not just something that is, we hear about, we talk about. It's something that actually they wouldn't have spent 20 years working with him if it weren't
Yeah.
real, And he talks about factors and forces that play out in our lives that we can all gain visibility to if we're alert of the fact that within each view and observation that we make, there's a level of detail that we never dig into. And therefore, we really never get to detect the factors that are playing out throughout the course of our lives.
Yeah, and I would guess that the majority of people will just kind of stumble in that regard and never get there and most likely to this on to some detriment.
Almost definitely. There are a number of different books, especially nowadays, on perception, on consciousness, on extra perception. Damien Peake writes a lot of books on what he calls cheating the ferryman theory and about death and what happens when we die and what happens to our consciousness, and how it never dies, but it gets incrementally smaller by the minute, by the second, by the half a second, by the quarter of a second, but it never goes down to zero. So therefore, we never actually die,
Mm.
but we reemerge in another lifetime, in another experience, and bring part of those understandings with us to our new life. So there's a lot of information that I think we're starting to get an understanding of, especially when you align it with quantum physics and what research is finding out with regards to consciousness and what we can't see. Is it available or is it still there? Versus, I mean, you're familiar with that whole concept of the tree falling in the forest,
Yes.
and whether in fact, if you're not there to see it, whether in fact it really fell,
Yeah.
and recognizing the fact that we are the ones that bring things into creation through conscious observance. And so therefore, he's really into that space, but fascinating books on that whole area.
Mm. That reminds me actually. There's a brilliant writer here in the UK called Nick Asbury, and he writes for campaigns and all kind. He writes all over, but he brings out these. He's got this really droll sense of humor, which is fantastic, and he brings out this book called The Perpetual Disappointments Diary, and and,
Really.
and there's a little line for each day. And I remember seeing him give a lecture, and on one of the days, it just says, "If a tree falls in the forest, but no one's there to hear it, does this remind you of your life?"
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to that point, Les Brown, motivational speaker of the 80s and 90s, used to say, "I don't want to be on my deathbed and have the ghost of the ideas that come to me as I'm passing and say, what happened? We came to
Mm.
you. You were the only one that could have brought us to fruition, and now we must die with you."
Mhm.
That's always been really one of my greatest fears about not being able to manifest what I seek to create, what I'm looking to create within this life.
Yeah, this is a recent thing that I've started to apply to myself is kind of
Okay.
to make myself accountable to both my deathbed self and my childhood self, you know?
Yeah. But how do you do that in a situation where you don't have an understanding of the control that you really have to bring those things into life, you know? I mean, we move forward and oftentimes we abdicate our responsibility towards taking care of our life because we can't understand how do we take control of our lives. And so, I can't imagine. I've been fortunate enough to always have an idea and always have a way to work through the situation that I find myself in. I can't imagine those people who are careening closer and closer towards, older and older age and don't have an idea of what do I do next? How do
Mhm.
I navigate through this period of now?
Yeah. What do you think? Well, I mean, what, and it's pure kind of, why do you think that the numbers of people that live that way do live that way? Do you think it's because as a society, as a people, we kind of, under capitalism, for example, do you think it's because we have all our motivations in the wrong order and education is very much geared towards a monetary system and jobs when it should be about wisdom and about the path through life?
I'm very much so a fan of the esoteric understandings and the esoteric beliefs. And I think ironically, we're very much so placed back into that sphere of entertaining the masses with the sports and with the celebrities and with everything that's going on. We're so mired down in what's going on in their control in their lives that we abdicate our control over our life. How many people, there's a story about the average person, I think less than like 15% of people who graduate from college read a book after college. We don't seek to learn more about any given area. And the only way you can really become truly creative in that area is to learn more about that area.
Mhm.
But yet we give it up because it's difficult, oftentimes because we don't learn how to learn. We don't learn how to think. And the fact that it's hard work thinking,
Yeah.
we don't really think about it. I mean, when it comes to athletics, we go to the gym and when you had a hard workout, and a lot of people say, I don't like that. I won't do that anymore. Thought is a very similar thing. It's even more difficult. And that's why we're so hungry after we've really studied hard, worked hard on ideating on a particular subject, because it takes and burns a lot of calories. It's just we're used to doing the athletic side of working our body, but we're not used to doing the process of thinking in a directed way. And, again, we give up a lot of our control because we're not thinking our way through the situation.
You're absolutely right. And that's really interesting about people not reading a book after college because it, I mean, I guess that amplifies the ills of the education system, doesn't it? And how we're presenting what success looks like.
I think it actually looks at our total societal, looks at a societal level from the standpoint of we don't really want much outside of what the celebrities present to us as to what we should want. We see what's on TV, we see the cars, we see, I'm seeing so much in the African American community, for example, about the material possessions, and everything's about, driving this and about getting that. And, in days, I've spent a lot of time, or at least back in the day, going back and forth to Tokyo, to Japan. And I remember when they were at the peak as far as their technological development, they were, a huge player in the space back in the 80s. And all of a sudden, you started seeing them descend. And they started to recognize that we will never be a major player because our time has come and gone. And so they're trying to teach their society how do you accept and expect less, because you can't have all of that. And we've never gone through this whole process of understanding really what is important and trying to moving people away from I want, I want, I want.
Mhm.
We've got these mega churches that are talking about prosperity worshiping, and you can have all this, and the fact of the matter is you can't have it all.
No,
It's not possible. We can't produce enough for everyone to have it all.
no,
So it's just a real messed up model that we're in.
yeah. And when it comes right down to it, you really don't need you need so little, for real happiness and real purpose. And I feel really fortunate in my life that I found creativity and the belonging and the community that and the purpose that fills my life with. And it's what it's done is in a very there was a degree of stumbling, but I'm an illustrator, that's my full-time job. But actually, it's been a while since I've been just an illustrator. I've been in love with creativity and the exploration and the learning. And creativity has led far beyond just creativity, and it's more about the human condition.
Mhm.
And to a degree, I've always had that. I grew up with a mum who was very interested in Buddhism and was very quite different in that regard. She was quite spiritual a lot in that sense. So, we were quite a poor family, but we very much had a lot of love, a lot of value on the right things. At least that's what I think, the right things, the things that we're talking about. And that's always been a presence. So it's always kind of been a compass for me. So even though there was stumbling, and now I'm 40 years old, but I feel like there's so much more control coming into this now.
Yeah.
And I think that, what you're here to talk to us today about, it's going to be
Mhm.
very much about that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying that. I would consider myself more on the neurodivergent spectrum, which means that for me, as how it manifests, I'm less emotionally sensitive. I can't understand certain ways in which I should be reacting in any given situation, what emotion I should feel. We're all on a different spectrum, and my particular area is just I'm less attuned to understanding the interpersonal relationships. And for me, it was therefore difficult during dating and even just developing friendships because I didn't know how to act,
Mhm.
what to say, what to do in any given situation, which makes it hyper uncomfortable from an anxiety standpoint. And so, the way I kind of even got into the whole question of neural creative programming, which is the methodology that I work with that helps you to understand the process of creation, is I recognize the fact that there are rules that I could follow that could help me to be more comfortable in a situation because I would be already pre-programmed to understand how to handle that situation. And that was something that kind of came out of the 80s with a guy named Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They created a methodology known as neural linguistics programming. And the neural is the five senses, how we perceive, how we understand. The linguistics is the things that we say to ourselves, the dialogues that we have, whether they're positive things that we're saying, I did a great job today, or whether the negative things, I was horrible, I'm fat, or whatever. And then the programming is how we are programmed to respond as a result of what we just spoke, that internal language. Now, for that's again neuro linguistics programming, and it's all inward focused. It's about the relationship that I have with myself and the relationship that I have with others. So that gave me really a structure to understand what's happening in the past. And so I can break that down and therefore make better decisions with regards to conversations, relationships, and so forth. I can act more consciously. But I also, being that creative and always looking for solutions to problems, I'm like I said, the product developer and so forth. And I started recognizing not the inward internal conversations, but the outward experiences that we have and the patterns that we detect within our daily lives. I mean, everything that we know exists according to a pattern. I can see your shape right now. I can understand you. I see you as being a pattern. You can see me. It's a pattern of an African American man. You know me as being Thai, therefore it's a pattern of Thai. But our experiences come in the form of patterns that are visual, that are auditory, that are smell, taste, or touch. And so we know our experience through those patterns. But if you think about, again, Steve Jobs' statement about you can't connect the dots by looking forward, you've got to look backwards. He's talking about the things that he saw in his background that he took note of, that he processed mentally to understand how it works, what it's doing, what's the end result of it. So it's a form and a function that he got an understanding of. And then he locked that away and he moved on to the next thing, but he had preserved a dot.
Mhm.
So, in recognizing how we collect our dots through our observations, I started to recognize also there's a way through which we go by and we assemble those dots through basically either minimizing a pain or a problem that we're dealing with or maximizing an opportunity that we see presents itself. And that's kind of how I got into the whole process of creativity. And while that process is different for all of us, there are certain base processes that play out because we're all experiencing the world in the same way through those five senses.
And I think that should give us comfort because I
Yes.
it's interesting because the sensitivity thing I find fascinating because I interviewed a lady called Jen Granneman for the 200th episode of this podcast, and she is she runs the biggest online introvert platform, and she's written a book all about highly sensitive people. And I very much have myself in the bracket. So she splits it into thirds. She says that roughly 30% of people would categorize as highly sensitive, 40% somewhere in the middle, 30% not so sensitive, and society simply wouldn't work without that balance. And you know, I've heard you say in another interview, the kind of the sensitivity and that the highs and the lows of highly sensitive people. That's a real thing. Then the lows can be really low, and I'm very blessed that I've never really suffered depression or gone down such a path. But I certainly had my challenging days. But it in the last couple of years, I had to gain a better understanding of the patterns in which my brain was working because I'm a new father, so I was more tired than I'd ever known in the past over a sustained period. So I was more vulnerable to negative thought spirals. And once I started to understand things like the fight or flight instincts and the way that my brain was behaving, it was a liberating thing that enabled me to step aside of myself and start to observe the way that I was responding and take greater control. And I've been much happier since and much more in control. And the recovery periods have been shorter. And that has really amplified my creativity because I'm able to get back to that place of optimism and curiosity much quicker and stay there much longer. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think we go into into these spirals, these thought spirals. We follow these breadcrumbs that take us into these certain directions, and we get locked in. I was having a conversation with a gentleman about we were talking not getting into politics, but he was trying to get into politics. But I was recognizing the fact that he can't move out of a certain frame of thought, and therefore there's no production value in these conversations because you can't have a conversation with a person who's locked in because they always go back to that same exact thing, and you can really only have a dialogue with the person who's willing to reflect back and to understand and really apply logic as to, well, if what I'm saying and believing, does it make sense? Is it part of my past? But it's funny how those things. I tell a story about how our experiences, long-term experiences affect our output, affect our outcome, and the way we process information real time. And I talk about how I spent a lot of time. I went to Costa Rica to learn Spanish. I wanted to really learn Spanish before I went back to college and finish that up. And I'm down there. Here I am, like 20 something years old, severe acne, low self-esteem. Just, I wasn't really in a great place. And I remember being at a bar, and I remember seeing this young lady across the bar, very attractive young lady, and she looks over at me. I look over at her, but I'm like thinking she's way out of my league, and she speaks Spanish. What am I going to do with this? But she walks over to me, and she says something to me, and I said automatically, "I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish." And she looks at me and she says, "I'm speaking English." But I had understood that she would present a certain pattern to me, and therefore I was locked into recognizing I'm not going to understand that pattern, along with, like you said, the fight or flight and the anxiety levels and all the other crap that I say to myself in that negative place that she's not going to have interest in me. I used to say I would never date a woman who would date me. So it was that bad.
That's getting into Schrodinger territory there. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. So, moving through that, once I recognized the words and we got into that sync on English, obviously I could understand and we were real good. But it just shows you the way the brain will lock down even our basic functions of hearing and processing information simply because of the baggage that we bring into any given situation.
Yeah, and this applies to so many things that are critical to effective and optimal creativity.
Right.
I think of, just to move it a different way, I think of luck and fortune and the perception of,
Mhm.
because again, it's that thing. Like I think of my dad, he's quite an old school Yorkshireman, and he's the kind of
Okay.
guy who goes around saying if he didn't have any bad luck, if he didn't have bad luck, he wouldn't have any luck, And it's I remember like my grandparents winning these raffles, and it's interesting because I've gone down the way of kind of optimism, and I'll have a go and I'll go in there, but it's not just a kind of blind luck thing. I also love the difference between luck and fortune. And
Okay.
fortune forces you to take an action to put yourself in a position to receive good fortune. And the more you kind of become conditioned to looking for that fortune,
Right.
it certainly brings it on. I have no doubt
It
about
builds
that.
momentum.
Yep.
Yeah, it builds momentum. I mean, going back to the gentleman Anthony Peake, he speaks about how we have we are the individual. This goes to ancient Greek mythology or ancient Greek understandings, but we are two parts. We are split brain parts of consciousness. And one side, and this has actually been proven, but one side of our consciousness is what he refers to as the Idolon. It's our self, it's the understanding, it's of where we are and the reality that we have, but it's given to us through what's called the Damien, which is the self that has understood reality, that has lived all realities, all the realities that we have ever lived through. It goes into, again, that everything, everywhere, all at once.
Mm.
And this is that self that is giving us the feedback and taking us in certain directions. And you need to be doing this, or here's a book that you need to read, or you should turn to this particular channel. And we're following those signs that we get to do certain things. And we will find that the Damien actually gives us the things that we need to move our lives forward in a direction, some would say, of our destiny. Fate versus destiny. I mean, if you can think of fate, fate is fatal. It's from the Latin fatal, versus destiny is from Latin, but it means to set aside, which is open-ended, which means it can go anywhere you choose to take it, versus fatal is fatal. It's an end. So, the Damien is something that I work with from the standpoint of keeping an eye out for those factors that come into play, that present to you opportunities that if you're not observant of, you will never recognize their existence, and you will just simply move through from one place to another.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a writer, and he used to refer to it. I don't think it was his phrase, but he used to refer to it as invisible hands, and
Yeah.
the sense of being helped along when you're working. I get, the way he used to look at it was working for something that's bigger than ourselves. We're leaning into something that's
The small can
selfless.
impact the large. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And he would refer to those as being the invisibles, to your point.
Yep.
Those forces and factors that are playing out.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's utterly fascinating. So I'm interested just to rewind a little. So I know that I'm interested in your kind of relationship with education, because I know that am I right in thinking you were kind of told, right, it's kind of manual work for you? And I ask because I know so many who've had this, and even at a young age, it never made sense to me. It was that idea that, well, you're not doing well in your exams, so maybe you could go and try lay some bricks. And that's kind of, to me, that was crazy.
It's funny that I know I'm different. I know that the way I process information is different from the way my peers in consulting may process it. It may be vastly different, but I know that there's a difference there. The problem, and I know you're talking about the story with respect to, the whole IQ test at a fundamental period in my life back when I was like five or fifth or sixth grade, where I'm giving this not prognosis, but this idea of I have limited intelligence and therefore limited ability, and my best bet is to go towards the trades. Um, that'll really F you up, you know.
And it does. I've lost friends who I feel that part of the path they took was down to that lack of a support in school when they needed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and being African American, my father was told the same thing, consider the trades. My aunt was told something very similar. It's a place that it's a position that we're placed into. And regardless of whether we choose to accept it or not, I went on and went to grad school. I've lived in a number of different countries. I've worked in different countries. I've worked for Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. But I also always walked around with a tremendous amount of anxiety of believing strongly that I'm not as good as these guys around, that I'm around, that I'm working with. And in truth, in many ways I wasn't. I just couldn't process the information the way that they could process it with regards to a given task. Other tasks, they couldn't stand up to me in one way, shape, or form. So I think it's a matter of the big thing that really helped me get through that was recognizing a gentleman, Dr. Howard Gardner, who wrote actually 13 different books, Harvard University professor, on multiple intelligences and how there are 9 different types of multiple intelligences that we all possess varying degrees of. And for example, the mathematical logical, which you would find in that standardized IQ test, or the naturalist person, who may be the indigenous person living in Borneo or wherever. Obviously, they're going to understand the plants, the understanding of the sky around them, what's happening with regards to the environment, that you can give them an IQ test and they will do abysmal at, but you can't take anyone who's a master on the IQ test in Mensa and put them out there in the field and expect them to be able to survive even a week.
Yes.
So it's a matter of leaning into the intelligences that you are strong with and forgetting the other ones, adding value there where you need the value, but forgetting them. I call it my instinctive advantages, the things that I'm naturally inclined to do well that make me the best person that I am, with regards to, again, what I do.
And once you recognize and begin to celebrate that, I think it's truly
Yes.
life changing.
Right, right. That because you're now, I think you will always have that fear that you're not smart enough. But if you can lean into know where you are better than pretty much 99% of the people. And even bigger, I'm a big I don't read a lot of books, but my audiobooks with Amazon with audible.com. Um I think I probably do close to 60 or 70 books a year because I want to absorb the content. And even though I may not be actively listening to some of it, I'm passively listening when I walk. And to be honest with you, I will smoke weed and I will take my long walks and I will listen and I will listen to that book 3 or 4 times if it's a great book. And I will absorb that content and I'll make notes in it and I will capture it and it becomes mine. And so, yeah, I'm a big person on especially read or listening to books as opposed to reading them because that's the way my brain works best.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And then it goes back to the sensitivity thing that this we wouldn't have survived as a species was it not for, I mean, on a linear level, creativity, because like you mentioned there with the indigenous people, that
Mhm.
being highly attuned to the environment and
Right.
recognizing whether it's plants, animals, threats, opportunities, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. But then without other things to complement that, it just wouldn't work. It's a biosphere. Um, and I'm the same, since becoming a twin parent, my time is crunched and my energy is less. But it's opened up this opportunity with audio, and I've always been an audiophile, but
Yeah.
I'm the same. I'm an audible listener, and the lovely thing about that is, I sometimes build up credits, and I'll take a punt. I'll just go, I'll get a potential podcast guest and go, brilliant. I'll either grab their book or an associated book and just
Yeah.
consume this volume that
Mhm.
otherwise I might not get around to. So there's a beautiful thing about audio.
Yeah. My attitude has always been nothing is wasted unless you waste it.
Mm.
And so when I'm consuming these books and moving through them, I will literally, I've got a methodology where I will literally go in and take certain notes at certain points of the book because they become part of my content and they become part of my bigger world of my overall understanding of how everything fits together. They're dots for me. And so, if there's an ancient expression that says nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
And as you can think about an idea like a cheeseburger, you have to have the raw materials. You need to have the bun, you need to have the cheese, you need to have the hamburger, the lettuce, or whatever, or you can't make that cheeseburger. An idea is the same exact way. If you don't have the raw ingredients from the experiences of I did this and I understood this and I figured out how that worked together to another experience over here of I saw this form and function operating in a certain way. And then you come to a situation where you have a problem that you have to solve. And that's when you're starting to pull these pieces together to create the solution. If you don't have those raw materials or the cheeseburgers, the cheese and so forth, you can't build the solution to a problem. So, I really am an advocate for wherever you can take in content. And I always say lean towards where you're naturally inclined to go because you can't lean into an area that is not your space because you will lose interest. You can't stay focused. You can't grab the content. But if you lean into an area where you are inclined to go, A, it'll keep your attention. But B, I guarantee you will find dots that
Mm.
will fulfill whatever dreams you're trying to fulfill. It's just there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I used to attribute that, the kind of motivated by passion and by personal interest and line of inquiry. I used to attribute that to myself. I used to say, well, that's just the way my brain works, and that's why I didn't do well at school, but that person did. Not so
Mhm,
much. I think it's a human condition. And
mhm,
actually, as I've grown older, I've noticed, some of those people who were academically smart and were pushed a certain direction to
mhm,
find unhappiness in various ways and have to and make real pivots.
mhm.
Whereas actually, it took, much like yourself, it sounds like it took me time to start to find threads. But when I did, and those threads held personal passions and interests, my motivation is as good as anyone's. And I love
Yeah,
that, you know?
most definitely. I think I was in actually when I finally figured it out. I had been kind of like jumping around, driving for my father. We used to have a trucking company, and which means that I had an out.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go to school. I could always do that. And after dropping out, going back to college, dropping out for a number of years, it wasn't until I moved away from my family down to Virginia and I was driving for another company, but I would go out and I'm sitting here by myself listening to conversations in bars and clubs with these beautiful people, talking about this and that, and these guys, in the relationships and dating. And I'm recognizing and overhearing these conversations that I'm smarter than them, that the content of the conversation and overall was so generic, but they had a college degree and I didn't have a college degree. And don't you know, I enrolled back 4 months later into college, finished up my undergrad, went right on to grad school because I recognized if they did this and I understood I was smarter than them based on the dialogue and the level of conversations that they were having, as far as the broad basis of topics. That really allowed me to recognize that I could do this too. Now I did it and I went on back, I went to grad school and everything else, but I suffered from severe anxiety all the way through college, grad school, and all the way through the first probably 20 years of my career, always believing that they're going to find out and that I'm going to be fired. And
Mhm.
so I think that may be one reason why I was driving towards entrepreneurialism. The second one was just that was where I was naturally wanted to be. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but
Was
that
there
really helped it.
was there a specific turning point when regarding the anxiety and the imposter syndrome? Was there not a moment as such, but was there a time or a level of understanding that you reached about the dots that enabled you to break away from that?
I think probably one of them would have been hearing that expression of the dots and understanding. I mean, he spoke of, for example, your gut, your destiny, your karma, and all that aligned with the process. For me, everything operates according to a process. Even back in the 1500s, we didn't understand how a plant grew. It wasn't until it was studied through focused conscious attention on what is happening here, what if I remove this, what's going to happen, that we figured out the process of photosynthesis. The same thing goes with anything that we try to create. We have to lean into the details. And so once I started to recognize that analogy of the dots, I started recognizing, one of the big ones. Here, this is probably it. I used to have a box that my sister bought me way back in the day, and it was a chest, and I would keep all the little keepsakes. I'd keep maybe the pictures of the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend, or whatever, these photos or whatever I would keep in them. But I would put them in that box, and eventually it wound its way down into the basement. Every time we went to clean out the basement, my wife, even my new wife, would want to throw the box out. She'd look through, she'd find that there's no value here. And I'm like, there's value here. And they're trying to figure out, well, why am I keeping this box? And I said, these pictures, these things in here are the only things that are left that will ever bring me back to what happened and the experiences that are in these pictures. If I lose this box, I lose these pictures, and I would therefore never, most likely, think of any of this ever again unless I think about what was in the box. Because we need to have something to connect us to something. And if you remove that box, I will never have a tendency to think about the box, which means I will never be able to think about the content in the box. And it was my way of being able to persuade her into allowing me to keep the box. But then I recognized that those were dots. And I needed those dots to understand the basis of what was in the box. And so it just became a bigger picture of the fact that, going back to the analogy, we need to have the raw materials for our ideas. And I recognize I was very good at collecting raw materials, a certain process that I go through, even developing technology to help to retain and detect those dots because it's part of everything that I try to create. It's I got to get my raw materials from somewhere.
Wow, it's really interesting and really timely because my wife and I cleared out the loft last weekend. We
Mhm.
outsourced the kids for a day and got everything down. But that emotive experience is incredibly powerful, and it speaks to the presence of art and culture in our lives because in these, there was a scruffy little toy monkey that the dog had had when he was a puppy,
Mhm.
and there was a box of photograph of a close friend I
Mhm.
recently lost, and all these overwhelming feelings and experiences. But like you say, it's there's so many layers within that. So, it takes me back to the time when I was at college and I took the first steps to this career that I love and this thing, this creativity. And my word, yeah, and language just completely falls away, doesn't it?
Right. Right. Exactly. And again, it's with all the whole concept of our experiences, we have to be able to figure out which ones are pertinent with regards to the things that we want to do next.
Yes.
So I mean, you, for example, you're an artist. You are primarily you work with paints. Um, do you ever do any sculpting? Do you ever do any tactile work as far as the actual materials are concerned?
No, very little. On a rare occasion, if I'm doing something purely for myself, for example, I had a 3D print of myself for the part of the way that I was going to brand the podcast, and just took the opportunity to create this sculpture. But no, in a sense, two-dimensional. I use ink, spray paints, organic media.
Gotcha. Now,
To
what about the other mediums as an option? Would that ever be of interest to you? You probably have said, I'd like to do this or that.
Oh, for sure. And I'm
Yeah.
completely, I write my emotional creativity now, and this is something I recently made the distinction between was emotional and intellectual creativity. And
Mhm.
this came through a creative. He's a guy called Peleg Top who's based in LA, and he describes himself as a coach for accomplished creatives at a crossroads. And he
Gotcha.
helps them get back to that place of emotional creativity where they're saying something that is pure and is coming from them,
Interesting.
not so
Okay.
much ticking boxes for clients. And so for me, what we're doing right now, and exploring creativity and writing both fiction and non-fiction are complete outlets of my emotional creativity. Um, and since I started to do that and work in audio, in the written word, in two-dimensional media, I've stopped putting myself from possibilities. I am completely open to what might present itself next. And it's like you said, Ty, it's about the dots and the feeling and trusting that even though I can't yet see where that's going to take me, if it
Mhm.
feels that good and there's serendipity happening around it, then I'm going to follow that and trust.
Yeah, and it sounds a lot like Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, he was a man who dug into the details. He would sit and he would observe the movement of the eye and how the skin would change and how the folds would come up, because everything exists within the detail. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, again, we move through life without recognizing anything that may be out of our norm because we're just not attuned to notice in greater detail. But it's funny how you can look at any one thing and you will find that if you look at it more closely, you will find a level of detail more closely. If you look at it even closer, depending upon your ability to actually see it based on the tool set. But if you look, no matter how deep you look, you will always find a level of detail that you can do something with that is of interest. And so, you have to have a big swath of something to look at in order to find the anomalies that may pull your attention and make you ask you to want to know more about that particular thing. But it's all has to be with respect to what comes into your frame of reference.
Yes, I was reading about this recently in I don't know if you've read A Creative Act by Rick Rubin, but
No.
his book is wonderful, and he very much gets into the granular and the again that sense of flow and that feeling. And if these things present themselves as points of interest to you, then to follow and to
Yeah. Yeah.
to lean into that, and not to put, the page I was reading the other day was about bringing our opinions to things, as in, you don't need to. If you get the motivation and you want to make the art and you create the thing, you've already expressed something on a deeper level. There's no need to then start explaining and justifying and everything else. That it is then the opinion is then locked in the work, and it's really
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, there's only two types of creation. There's the process of procreation through the, offspring through having children. The other type of creation is right here in mental, because everything that is expressed through the tactile form that is actually created, manifested, has to be thought of first. And so, that's why it's such an important thing. You'll find, for example, people like Nikola Tesla, he wouldn't even touch a pen and paper until he had already designed it within his mind. And then he had a fully formed figure of what he wanted to create, but that was a matter of first learning the tools, learning the compass, learning the slide rule, learning all the different pieces. and the processes that you have to use to put these things into place. And then learning the mathematical rules of how things have to work with regards to building any construction you're going to build. But the more and more you're moving into that, the more and more you're understanding and developing that proficiency, just like driving a car, you're moving beyond the ability to need to actually use the devices itself, where things are created directly within mind. That's mental alchemy, creating something from nothing, creating something greater from the sum total of all the different pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And you remind me that there's a magazine in the UK here called the Idler, and it's about a more full, it's a slower pace of life.
Gotcha.
Their strap line is slow down, live well, have fun, and
That's
it's
right.
this idea of exploring creativity and taking pauses in your life and actually not placing all the value. It sounds very entitled, but it's really not. It's actually about making the space, even if it's just 2 minutes in your life,
Gotcha.
to reflect and to consider. And I interviewed Tom Hodgkinson, who's the editor for this show, and his idol and the whole reason for starting the magazine was Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was a famous idler, and he would famously, he would produce incredible, powerful work and wisdom, but he would lie down on his bed for long periods of time and not exactly like you said about Nikola Tesla there, not touch an implement or not commit anything down until he had the time to just state and to manifest and then to emerge. And then he would do it, but he was, he always delivered.
Yeah, but that's a process in itself. Again, I call it focused ideation. I call it clearing the slate of everything else and saying, and I work with cannabis as well. So that's part of my program, whether it's a desire to use THC or not. There's certain things that happen when the brain is on cannabis, affecting the CB1 receptors and the way the information, the way you're storing it either in the short term and the long term memory, the way you're pulling it back. There's certain things that you can do on cannabis that are much more difficult to do outside of a cannabis experience or outside of a meditative experience. And so, I work with cannabis from the standpoint of helping to create it talks about we all go through this mathematical logical process, the executive function. We're very good at math. We can do our division, subtraction, all this other stuff. But it's difficult to, just like when you're daydreaming, it's difficult to daydream at the same time doing mathematical logical questions unless you're on THC. Because when you're on THC, and I don't know whether you smoked before in the past or whether you are, but when you're on THC, there's something that happens with regards to the brain and its processing of the logical mathematical activities that you're trying to perform, while at the same time being able to take it off in fanciful ways that would have never been part of your direction of where you'd like to normally take it outside of being high. And so in working with that, I'm part of my whole program is actually building and teaching that whole process for folks who may be new to cannabis, who are interested in leveraging it more so, not just for relaxation or I just want to sit back or whatever type of medicinal medicine they want to use it for. This is more so about focus ideation. It's about how do you direct that thought, move into a ritualistic process so you can, again, manifest within the mind before you can actually bring it to fruition on paper in whatever medium you want to bring it through.
Yeah, and it's just another avenue, isn't it? It's,
Yes.
that's fascinating. I actually have a show booked in next week with a comedian who recently went on a psychedelic retreat, and it's a very similar line of thought, as in dealing with anxieties and many things with the mind
Yeah.
through this other avenue. And it seems like there's a real I don't know what the word is, but there's a real awareness at the moment into and open mindedness in terms of this kind of expansion, and I think
States, especially in the States, you're seeing a lot of legalization. I know you guys aren't as legal or as open as we are here. I see Germany's looking at passing legislation. I see that Ukraine just actually legalized, for treating PTSD, and the whole thing of dealing with those anxieties. That there's obviously, if you've ever smoked cannabis, you've probably been in a period where it's hyper anxious moments. And that's because cannabis will take you where you're inclined to go. And if you're inclined to go towards an area that causes you distress, it will help you to build a beautiful picture of that distressful area. But again, you can take it in other directions. And so that's where I help people to. I remember during when the war was breaking out with Ukraine, and I had smoked one evening, and I started to catastrophize. And I started to think, well, what's going to happen here? I actually went out and purchased iodine pills, as a matter of fact, during those early days. And a lot of people did. But you start to catastrophize, especially on cannabis. But you have to know how to pull yourself back and recognize what's happening and redirect your thoughts through conscious effort and attention. And you can do it. But I think that applies to many other things, especially as it relates to other things that may impact us via PTSD and the
Mhm.
traumas that I've had. I know that the more you give attention to something, the more that something grows, especially when it comes to your mind and the receptors in the mind and building a bigger, stronger connections between the receptors. But the converse is true as well. The more you remove the negative things, the things that hurt you, the things that really tore you apart as a young person, the more you stop yourself automatically and saying, I'm not giving it energy, the more those receptors start to weaken, especially on cannabis. The more you can start breaking away from the things that caused you trauma in the past. And there's this great analogy I saw on Netflix where it talks about the mind on psilocybin and how psilocybin acts as if it's like a new, your brain is like a ski slope, whereby through all the trauma that you've experienced in life, there are grooves that are cut out in that slope that represent that trauma. But psilocybin has an effect of layering a new layer of snow on top of that, and therefore allows you to redevelop a new understanding in those relationship with those trauma or those traumatic events that's less impactful, that's less impactful for you emotionally, and therefore you're allowed to move past it and recognize it happened while not giving it credence to it being able to control you in the future or going forward.
Yeah, and that goes back to like we talked about the clearing of the loft or the box in the basement. It's very much it's seeing those things and not being yanked back into that former version of
Exactly.
ourselves, but it's seeing what was great and what the learning was there and what the beautiful emotions that we can carry with us into the
Right.
future, isn't it? It's about
Right.
cherry picking and conscious disregarding of the things that continue to
Yeah.
hurt us.
Yeah, I mean, we probably all, I used to, again, driving trucks, and I remember being in the truck once, tractor trailer, long, big ass trailer, hauling, I think it was just dropping off a load, and I'm flying and I'm racing down 95, and I shouldn't be. We're at highway, it's in traffic, and, I'm not moving any faster than anybody else is, but, I'm in a rush state. And I remember pulling over in front of another truck that was right behind me because he had left space. And I remember seeing the back of his trailer start to cut over, start to jackknife. And the adrenaline that rushed through my body as I'm recognizing the fact that I may have killed somebody through this act that I had performed. Thinking about that even today will shoot my blood pressure up and what I could have done as a result of that stupid action that I performed. So, we keep that stuff and we relive it as if we're actually living it in the present time. It's just, again, being able to break away from it consciously and redirect thoughts. Now I work not to give it energy. It will creep back, but I have to consciously work not to give those things energy.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? With any of this work we do with our
Exactly.
minds, it does require constant work.
Exactly.
We can't just learn a technique and think, "Cool, sorted it now. I'm stronger." It does take constant work.
You have to constantly do it, right? And be consciously aware of your actions and where you're allowing your thoughts to go.
Yeah, but like anything, I guess it's like muscle memory too. It doesn't mean that it's always hard work. It is to be anything new, of course, is challenging to begin with. But
Yeah.
the more that we do that, and then the more we create that positive habit, then it becomes second nature.
Yes. Yeah. When we're moving into automatic function, automatic mode, we know not to give. And I do think of it in terms of energy. I mean, we process about 350 calories a day in food, or from the standpoint of what we consume on just thought alone.
Mm,
And so I've kind of moved into the thought process of I will not give energy, calories, thought to things that don't add value to my life. The negative things, the things that really hurt me, I don't give them energy because I'm giving them calories of energy. And I only have a certain amount each day for thought. And I got to give it to that which is adding value to my life.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so think different nation. Um, who were the earliest people that you worked with once you started to do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's basically people who are dealing with certain types of situations and unable to figure out a bigger picture of themselves. A lot of them are people that are stuck on a certain avenue because they can't get their mind out of a certain position of where things must be, where they have to be with regards to their goals, their dreams. Many times we get so mired down in the trash. Again, that's not adding value to our lives, and it's a matter of reframing the direction of where we're trying to get to, so we can really focus in. One gentleman I remember was a lawyer, and this man had been in intellectual property law for years, and he had just retired. He's taking care of the family. He'd done quite well, and he said that I will literally read a good 2 or 3 books a month because I just like reading and I like reading about technology, about this, about that. He said, but I don't have a creative bone in my body. And I said, it is impossible for you to not have a creative bone if you consume so much content. I mean, it's just not possible.
No, it's not.
So, that was a matter of working with him to understand the processes, again, that we go through when we think, when we create ideas, and start to get him to recognize the fact that you've got to identify something, a challenge. If there is no challenge, we don't create solutions. That's just a human nature. We don't create solutions where there is no challenge. But when there is a challenge, either a negative, think about the clan of the cave bear, where you've got the cave bear that walks into the cave, kills a number of people within the community in the cave itself. The community goes and kills the bear. But what does the community do next? They cut that bear up. They use that skin from that bear. They eat that bear. They mourn their losses and they move on. You minimize the risk, which means you take advantage of the challenge. You minimize the challenge and then you leverage what was presented to you as that challenge. But then you maximize the opportunity again by using those pelts and using the other things associated with it. So I think we have to really focus in on either a problem that we're trying to solve that's a negative, or a problem that's a positive that can catapult us forward. But then there's the other thing of what types of questions do we ask ourselves? And if you think of Richard Kipling, the book of I Keep Six Honest Serving Men, they taught me all I know. And he talks about the what's, the whens, the whys, the hows, the wheres, and all the other iterations of possible questions that we ask ourselves, again, about any given situation or observation that we find. Collect
Mm.
more dots. And once you recognize them as dots, you will naturally begin to fit them into solutions for problems that you're able to identify.
Yeah. And there's something about the process we go through with adversity and challenges that, you know, um, how do you start to enter that mindset or to find that kind of impetus when you're not in that situation? Obviously, it's more difficult, but there are ways that where you can start to control and find those processes. So you
Yeah.
can, admittedly, not with the same urgency or desperation, but you can engineer to a degree
Yeah.
within the creative process. I have a friend who turns to it who does behavior design, and again, it's about recognizing and analyzing those handicaps and those opportunities in a way that you can structure anything from your workspace, your environment, your mindset. Maybe she said to me she's partial to going on social media too often. So even
Mhm.
just simple things like moving the phone over to the other side of the room is enough sometimes for her to counter that behavior and then,
Okay. Yeah.
to
Change the behavior, change the routine. Everything's about a routine. We have to have a routine. Nature abhors a vacuum. So, if you don't set one, it will be set for you. And that routine may not be in your best interest. For me, looking at some of my greatest challenges and therefore how I pivoted those, I went through a traumatic divorce where I pretty much had to kind of sell off everything. And one of the things that ultimately could have been sold off was my house. And I'm here. Here's a house that's 1890s, a beautiful home in a great town, but it needed a lot of work. And so I'm sitting here trying to figure out how do I do something with this house and get it renovated, getting offers from investors at like 1/10 of the value. And so what I did with that was I recognized the fact that A, there's a value in this property, and B, that if they're offering me this money to buy my house so they can add value, so they can sell it and make more, then why can't I flip my own house?
Mhm.
And so I started thinking in terms of that. And then I started putting together a platform that I call Invest Out that would allow people to be able to add their properties to the portal, where they know they need work, they know that they can't sell it for maximum value, allow the investors to come in to do the investment, to do the raise the value on the property at their cost without having to buy the house. And then the homeowner sells the house, and then they split a share of that increased value. Therefore, the homeowner's making more money, the investor's making more money. And the way I track that out, I mean, you're making 30, 40% more money depending on the neighborhood, depending on the value of the property, because you've got people competing to want to take part in investing in your house. But that was a way of dealing with minimizing the risk, i.e., the house that I had to deal with, and then maximizing the opportunity. Well, I'm not going to create a book on this. First, I created a book, then I did some coaching on it, and then I actually transformed it into a portal, a website. So I think in any given situation, we have an opportunity to minimize a negative problem. It's just a matter of how wide we are from the standpoint of looking around at the dots that we may have available. I had a background in IT. I knew website design. I knew Excel. I could put together formulas to figure these things out. And therefore, I had all the raw materials necessary to bring this, which allowed me to do it. But if you don't connect the pieces from the standpoint of how things, other people are doing it, then it's hard to apply their experiences to yours and therefore to get similar results.
Yeah. And then when you look at, the kind of purer, if we think of artists and people who like to work with flair, there's that, there's often that misconception that it should be kind of random and explosive.
Yeah.
But actually, I find that I have no doubt whatsoever that people are far more creative when they have some parameters and some structure, because what that does is takes away some of the bullshit and the kind of the things that get in your way, and
Yeah.
they enable you then to create freely within that structure.
Yeah. Yeah. You redefined it the way you want to define it. I mean, again, Leonardo da Vinci, he stole from everybody. He stole ideas from this, from that, even the Petruvian Man or the Vitruvian Man. He got from someone else and he made changes to it and they made it better. So, I mean, everything is a regurgitation of everything else.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what style are you going to add to it and what you can do with it. Steve Jobs traveling through China and looking, or through Asia and looking at ways to enhance his computers and recognizing, seeing, the rice cookers all around and recognizing when you walk by the breakable cord that falls off. Hey, let me incorporate that into my laptops. Let me incorporate it into my devices. Or his studies of script and early on when he was looking at fonts and calligraphy. Hey, why don't I incorporate this into it? So you have to have those experiences in order to be able to incorporate them into something new. Again, that mental alchemy.
Yeah, and then again, from the kind of hermetic laws that you speak about, the duality of everything. This is something that, fortunately, through the people that, friends that I made in my mid-teens, they were all very open and very celebratory about our shadows and about our quirks and those things that some people get embarrassed about and treat as negatives. I was able to own those from a very early age, which gave me a fearlessness to then go out and have fun and sort of, and I recently wrote about this, and I said that on one hand, I would say that my drive is, on a ranking system of 1 to 10. So are you aware of Top Trumps, the game?
No.
It's a card game where they have versions for everything. It might be pro wrestling, it might be a sport, but it's a ranking system of 1 to 10. And, so if you're comparing Magic, one character might have a Magic score of 9 out of 10. And
Okay.
if your opposing card has 6 out of 10, you claim the card. It's really simple format, but it's so I like to look at my personality in this way. So I looked at it as kind of my drive within my creativity would be maybe an 8 or a 9.
Okay.
Some people might go, oh, I wish mine was that. On a bad day, that can be a bad thing because that can make me like a bull in a china shop if I don't control it. I can take on too many projects. I can be too passionate and go straight in and not be patient enough to see the detail that we talked about earlier. On the flip side, I'm quite a clumsy person. I'm quite haphazard. It's annoying around the house when I'm breaking dishes, but that's the genesis of my art style, which is this very naive, human, stripped back style.
Okay.
And once I became consciously aware of that, like you said, I was able to manage the downside of that, but really amplify and draw them, make the most of the upside.
It
And I
became
think
your
once
space.
once you start to look at everything with duality,
Yeah.
there's not all that, and there is some stuff that you just go, okay, that's just an undesirable. I'm just going to work with that and push that to one side and manage it. But most stuff you can draw good and bad from if you're aware of it.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that you're saying that. You had mentioned even, for example, Hermetic teachings, Hermetic principles, and for me, in my understanding of those and the revelation provided me literally with rules. Again, I need rules because I don't know how to operate within this playing sphere without knowing the rules from which to operate. And so, in understanding the laws, for example, it was pivotal for me to understand the process of, again, of creation, because we create within a structure, within a world. And so, to your point, and understanding those laws helped me to understand the logic of the world in which we create within. And people will hear that and will say, "Well, that sounds, why would you give such credence?" And I'm like, "Well, Newton gave credence.
Yeah,
Newton got his three laws of motion from those, and those were the operations of the universe that led to the development of Western civilization. So surely I can give them at least a little bit of attention. They're powerful, but we just don't look at them. We don't understand them because we don't dig into the depths of them. But like
yeah,
correspondence is nothing coming from nothing.
mm,
That's one of the fundamental laws that spring from the Big Bang, the
yeah,
continuation. And so, yeah, I have to lean into them because they provide me with a rule of operation.
yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, look, Ty, I think I've kept you for long enough. Oh, do you know, there is one thing actually that I overlooked that I'd just love to touch upon if you have the time, which is the epigenetics. That's completely fascinating to me. If you could give us just a little whistle stop of what that is and your take on
Yeah.
that.
So let me see if I can give a much base understanding of it, or a baser understanding of it. I think of epigenetics in terms of the evolution of us. When we as a species evolved, we evolved in a particular way, different parts, different regions of the world. When we come into our own little communities, the Japanese, without much exposure to other places, they would have evolved their own personal attributes, characteristics that were tied specifically to the location of Japan. They would have eaten certain foods that were possibly different. So, therefore, genetically through DNA, they are evolving different by degree from the other people that may be eating different things, maybe doing different things, maybe practicing different ways. So, I really lean into the understanding of epigenetics because I think it also provides us with an experience of, you can look at, for example, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant was obviously a person who was genetically aligned with his father, who was a professional basketball player. He had certain abilities that he would have had because of his alignment with his father, versus other people that don't have that walk into much more difficult situations. Now, just tying it all together, if you can think about, for example, the building of Notre Dame, and if you can think about the first people who started to to dig the foundation and lay the first stone, and over the 150 plus years it took to finally finish Notre Dame, and the son and his son and his son doing the same exact things. They're developing intelligences of that understanding of rock masonry and of building these things that other people could have never developed because they weren't tied to that. My professor in grad school was a Harvard University student in undergrad and grad. This guy had worked on civil rights movement and some of the laws affecting like people like the Black Panther Party and so forth. But he would tell me that his father, his uncle, his grandfather, everybody in his sphere were lawyers, which means that he is in a household where there's nothing discussed but law around that table. And therefore, your brain naturally develops certain abilities with regards to how it would construct understandings about these things as it relates to law that would make him, I believe, predispose him to be better at law and at processing that type of information than other people would be, simply because he's got the history and the background and the lineage of people who thought in a very similar way.
I just found it really interesting and I'm quite new to, I mean, in the specific sense, I'm quite new to it. I mean,
Yeah.
in a broader sense, I'm quite like I've read *Sapiens*, the book, and things like that that give a
Incredible book. Yeah,
yeah
great book.
touch upon it.
And
So yeah, just really just pure curiosity on my part. I just find it really
I
interesting.
think we continue to evolve individually. Of course, we're a dead end, but I think, there's layers upon everything. So everything that we taste, we touch, we see, we hear, every emotion that we have, it leaves a trace in our DNA. It leaves a trace in our genetics. And therefore, it's building a foundation in our genetics. If you think about, for example, the Holocaust, or you think about slavery and the slave trade, the 400 years of that, there is a genetic legacy of slavery that was created within the African Americans, because you can't go through trauma
Mm.
without having the chemical creations produced through going through those traumatic periods across X number of years, without having and seeing that within the DNA structure of a person. And they say the same thing for Jews who went through even a shorter period of time, but went through the Holocaust. It leaves a layer. Everything affects us in every way. We just may not see it, but the law still applies. There's an effect to everything. And so I think it's funny seeing cause and effect in the fifth principle, or the sixth principle, cause and effect, aligning directly with epigenetics, in that there's an effect to everything that we experience because it affects us with regards to our structure, our DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, creativity being an extension of self, that's in
Exactly.
there.
Those experiences, those understandings. Right, right. Nothing comes from nothing.
Wow. This has been a wonderful education for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time today. It's truly appreciated.
Of course, likewise, the pleasure's all mine. And am I right in thinking there's a free consultation available for people who might be interested
Most
from the back of this
definitely. Yeah,
conversation?
my site is available. It's up, thinkdifferentnation.com, and they can always come into the page and select some time. And I will dedicate the time to have that conversation. I'm really looking forward to getting to know people and to understand their specific creative abilities. I have one, but I want to know about, for example, the musician, how they create, what's their mind process, what processes do they go through, what senses do they lean into, or whatever. I really want to know about the athlete,
Yeah.
because it's bodily kinetics, and it's completely different type of learning and understanding and processing. And so, yeah, I definitely would be interested in conversations.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, Tye. Well, like I said, thank you again, and keep in touch. I'll be keeping an eye on what you're up to, because this is truly wonderful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much to Tye Glover for taking the time out of a busy schedule to talk to me today. I hope you took a lot from that. So much to work with. It might take a second bite of the cherry for that one. It's brilliant. I love energy balls like that. Tye was an absolute dynamo. We've got Athena Actopus coming up very soon on the show. Big episode about apocalypse psychology and about dealing with the heaviness of the world and channeling it into something amazing and making yourself more resilient, actually ready for apocalypses, but also just better knit to your community and more creative. It's a really fascinating one coming up. We've got Radim Malinic coming back to the show of Brand New. He was on episode 119, I think it was. 118 or 119, have a look. Really inspiring conversation about indie publishing, about his book of ideas 1 and 2 at the time. And now he's back in true Radim form with 5 new books. Just deal with that. We're talking about the first 2, which are awesome. Mindful creative comes hand in hand with selling creativity, and they're awesome. Really great books. If you can afford to do so, get mine first, of course, The Creative Condition. No, I'm kidding. We're all in this. We're all helping creativity. So if you can support any of us, it'd be awesome. But Radim's books are really, really beautiful. So have a look. Well worth your attention. He's coming up. He's coming back to the show soon. So many exciting things coming on. Off Festival next week in Barcelona. I'm speaking to Stefan Sagmeister live in conversation. We're going to be on the Root stage, which is the main stage. 6:45 p.m. Big slot on the Friday. I'm really excited about that and slightly daunted. We're going to be picking up where we left off with our first conversation about long-term thinking and why now is better. Buzzing about that. Hope to see some of you there. Get in touch. Please do rate, review and subscribe to the show if you get a chance. It really helps. Thank you once again to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X, and the Ukrainian Institute. Go and support those guys as well. They're doing so much good work in such a horrible time for their nation. Thank you for listening, guys. Hope to see you off. See you on the other side. If not, take care.